Hello and welcome to our writing DVD. The instructional movie was scripted and filmed entirely for the purpose of this series. It was made to serve the equipment section, not the story. The story and the performances are secondary. It is there to educate, not entertain. The actors were hired, the DP signed on, expressly to make a movie dedicated to teach students how to become writers and artists by living through a fictional character's shoes. The movie was not made to win Oscars. We didn't push the actors too hard, and often 5 or more scenes were filmed in one day. The dialogue sounds textbookish, primarily because it is technical information being delivered in a dramatized scene. However, it fulfills the task of showing the progression of a performance from take to take and what we modified. Also, it shows a map of all the errors that a new writer makes and why the writer should never give up no matter what. The character may seem a bit awkward at first, as though he's completely mindless. He is that way on purpose to illustrate a worst-case scenario. Not each student will benefit entirely from the character's misadventures, but everyone will learn something. That is why we approached Jake's character from the worst-case perspective and built it up from there. The instructional movie, DVD 2, was filmed with a skeleton crew of no more than 3 people, with lighting kits and audio kits readily available to struggling filmmakers. It was kept lean to teach students how to use easily attainable equipment, not large expensive setups. Every error we made in the filming of the movie is discussed later in the movie production, in such a way as to help you learn from our mistakes. The movie is not there to impress the student with our abilities as filmmakers. We can do a lot better. However, we spent 90% of our energy making the behind the scenes of the movie, which is what constitutes the DVDs 3 through 6, which are all the movie production DVDs. That's what we concentrate our energy on, is to be able to round out your information of the production of the movie, not the movie itself. If we wanted to concentrate all of our energy on the movie, we would have made a great movie, but then you wouldn't have a production section to learn from. The movie is simply a means of delivering information to the student, and also to create a base for the movie production DVDs. That way, when you watch the movie production DVDs, you feel like you've already come in contact with the scenes earlier. You do not have to watch the instructional movie to get the information from the production section. If you simply want to learn production, just go ahead and skip to DVD 3 through 6 and learn about the movie production aspect. You do not need to watch this DVD to learn about production. It is simply a choice that you would want to make as a writer if you want to learn about writing. One last note is that there are some scenes that you're going to see in the movie production section that are not in the movie. That's because we shot them, but then we took them out of a movie because they took away from the movie in some way, either took away from the flow or from the actual movie itself as a whole. So we took them out of there, but we left them in the movie production section so you can learn how we did those particular scenes. They're still going to help you as a filmmaker. They're going to help you with lighting. They're going to help you with acting. They're just not in the movie right now because they just don't really serve it in any way. They don't serve the story in any way, but they will serve you for filmmaking later on in that particular section. So hopefully the movie will give you something to base your knowledge on for the actual movie production DVDs, that you will see certain scenes, you'll remember what they are, and then actually when you watch us making them in the behind the scenes and the way we explain to you exactly how we made them, you will have had a base established of exactly what everything's supposed to look like when it's incorporated into the movie.
Ever since I was 12 years old, I wanted to make movies. I spent so much time watching movies as a youngster that my mom used to say that Robert De Niro was my babysitter. But things hadn't quite worked out for me the way I wanted them to. My life was kind of, well, not what I imagined it would be. I'm not saying that I hated my life, but when I was younger, I had seen myself doing bigger and better things by now. All I wanted was to make films.
Hurry up!
But I was stuck with 2 dead-end jobs. Although, I did find a joy in feeding people, though I tried to make the best of it.
That's why you work with American.
It didn't always work. I felt like I was floating through life, never able to commit to anything. There wasn't much time for anything else, especially sleep. My thing, the thing I wanted to do, was to make movies. But how can you do that when you're too tired from working and working?
Hey, bye.
Poor guy. He's 40 years old, still washing dishes. I guess I'm not that far behind him. I really hope something changes in my life. Everywhere I looked, I saw a story taking place. I saw these images that I knew they weren't there, but they seemed so real. Sometimes they were so clear, I could feel myself drifting into their world. My mind would transport me to all these different places. I would see a series of events taking place, and something inside me it wanted me to make these ideas concrete. Like a painter that sees a scene and has to get that image on a canvas. I wanted to keep a record of the moment. And then boom, I'm back in reality. And unfortunately, I'm not a painter, I'm not an artist, so I had no way of recording those moments. The gear locks in with the rest of the machine.
Hey, grab him up. Get over here.
And it does as it should. The images kept popping in my head more and more. Again and again. And the more often that they popped in my head, I didn't want to leave them. I wanted to join that scene. I wanted that to be my world. Sleep, wake up, eat, work, sleep, over and over. There's nothing like getting knocked flat on your back to make you reevaluate your life. Something changed. I was different. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before. I don't know why, but I had to write. I had to finish something that I had started a long time ago. My writing was a collection of failed attempts. I would start a script from a great idea that I wanted to make into a movie, but on the 5th page, the ideas would stop, and I would lose all energy to keep going. Yes! The ideas were flowing. I just hoped that my fingers could keep up. 0 hours sleep, but at this point, it didn't matter. I had actually started writing again. Time to put my mind on cruise control.
Hey, wake up.
Hey, what happened to you last night?
Sorry. I had a bunch of scripts that I wanted to look at and some ideas I wanted to get down on paper.
I was just really worried.
I couldn't wait to get back home to start writing again. Hello, DOS monster. Did you miss me? I'm gonna type away a whole script. The words, find them. My ideas were cemented in my head. Type, type. Sleep, sleep. Page 2016? I had so much energy, I didn't know what to do with myself. The accident that day, it really clicked in me the way I think about my life and my passion. I'm pushing through something here. I never had this many thoughts about a script. I think I'm gonna finish it. Ready to go. Let's do it. You can do it. Fingers, work, mind, move. Why aren't the ideas coming? That's no good. That sucks. Who wrote this? Did somebody sneak into my apartment and write garbage? I figured if I couldn't write anything new, I might as well go back and fix what I already wrote. Erase. Erase everything. Just throw it out the window. Why am I even working on this computer? This is complete garbage. I'm so tired of this happening every single time. Why can't I write? Even fourth graders can write. Was it ever gonna happen for me? Was I ever gonna make it? I tried to get my thoughts together, but it just wasn't happening. Alright, fresh perspective. I figured if I could just get myself awake enough, it would come to me. The ideas would come to me. It's just me and you, computer. Nothing. The words just didn't come. There was no imagination. There's gotta be something I can do to put myself in a creative mindset.
Hello?
Rachel.
Hello?
Rachel.
Jane?
What are you doing?
She'd just go to sleep.
Because I have to write a good story. You wanna help?
What do you mean?
I need you to type juxtaposition. Well, I guess that didn't work out. I didn't write anything. I didn't exactly impress Rachel either. And there goes any respect she may have had for me. Back to the old snake pit. What a pathetic existence. Was I the only loser living this way? It's always going to be the same way. And I will never succeed. I will keep failing and failing.
I'm right back where I started. Another roadblock, just this time at page 25.
It's a process. You can't let that one thing get you down. You're on page 25. You have 25 other scripts that are on page 5. It's a start, right?
And just when I thought I was lost, the images started popping in my head. Vivid and clear, and I just described these images. Firefighters, cops, sirens, lights. For some reason, I didn't want to type them. I wanted to write them out. In the early moments of dawn, a man was dragging a trash bag into a pickup. The large man was struggling unusually against the weight. As the trash bag was being dragged, it was torn open, and suddenly blood began to trickle from it. The man saw the crimson fluid begin to pool in a spot. He looked around cautiously, then lifted the bag the last 5 feet to the pickup, struggling every moment, face alight red with strain, back-popping vertebrae. After he got it in there, he ran to the cab and grabbed a bottle of water. He ran back and with shivering hands, emptied the contents onto the pool of blood. The blood partially dissolved and seeped toward a street drain. The man said to himself with great fear that it looked like the earth was bleeding. He passed his hands over his face to reveal his nervousness and wiped the sweat, then looked at them. his face a study in guilt and fear. He turned to the truck, slammed the door shut, and turned the engine. I was so deeply embedded in that dream, it felt like it was real. I had just kept writing and writing and writing. I thought I had forgotten how to write with a pencil. The phoenix rises from the ashes again, and it wants to fly. Come on. Why couldn't I write? Earlier that morning, the images were coming to me, and the words to describe them were all right there. It can't end this way. It's just started. This is so stupid. Five o'clock in the morning? Why am I up at 5 o'clock in the morning? I don't have to be awake for another 3 hours. I'm not hungry. It's nice and quiet. I guess I feel like writing. Maybe I'll just sit here and see what comes to mind. I don't care. At this point, I'll write anything. Detective Ronson is on the scene. She notices the blood stain on the ground, blots it, and saves it in an evidence bag. She discusses the details of the crime with her fellow officer. He agrees with her, and they decide to ask the neighbors some questions. I was on some type of hidden schedule. Every morning, an alarm clock would go off in my mind, and I would wake up and feel the need to start writing. I kept getting up earlier and earlier, around sunrise, so that I could write more. My mind wasn't filled with a day's worth of stress, and I was still in my lucid dream state. I felt like I was in the zone. My hands moved by themselves. I closed my eyes and my hands were still writing directly from my mind. I did a bit of research at the library, and I found out that when you go to sleep, you live in the unconscious mind, which is responsible for all of your creativity. It doesn't make any sense when interpreted by the conscious mind that does all the rational thinking, but all of the creativity comes from the unconscious. So you have to harness it to come up with creative thought. But it's not easy. You have to be consistent. It likes to be allowed to express itself at regular intervals every day. It lets you into its world. And that's where all the ideas are. That's where you get all the wonderful twists and turns. It's like walking into a room and knowing everything inside that room. The unconscious mind is like a little kid. When he sees familiar surroundings, he relaxes, and he knows it's safe to play. I also learned that it's important not to judge your creative mind, not to go back and correct grammar and spelling, or change any aspect of the first draft. It should come out as it is in your mind. I need to also write an outline, so that I know where the ending is. I also have to write a genre for the screenplay, so I can keep the story at the same key all the way through. I learned that I have to make a log line, so that I can quickly remember the tone and direction of my story. I fixed my story and rewrote it in screenplay form, but that's the last time I do it like that. Next time, I'll write it in screenplay format from the get-go. I learned that I shouldn't tell anyone about my story before I'm done writing it, because the unconscious doesn't care if the words come out of my mouth or go on the paper. As soon as they come out once, the mind feels like it's told the story that it wants people to know, and that's enough said. I would sit down to finish the first draft, but my mind kept jumping to other subjects. I was so close to the ending, but I didn't have a clue how to finish. I knew the ending, but I just didn't know how to get there. And then I found a solution. Research. I went back and read some books on criminal justice. After I read a week's worth of case files, reports, analyses, I finally got my unconscious mind's attention again. True, the story went into a slightly different direction, but I think that it turned out better. I'm not a policeman or a crook. What do I know about crime? All I know is what I saw in other movies or read in books. So I figured out that if you don't know something, either don't write about it or research it before you get started. After I finished my first draft, I felt like I was dreaming. I finally wrote Fade Out, and I was so happy. I wrote first draft on the front of the writing pad.
I'm so proud of you.
So what do you think I should do now?
Well, I think you should put it away for a while and let it marinate.
Marinate, huh?
After a few weeks, I went back and started on my second draft. There were so many mistakes, continuity problems, grammar issues. I went back and fixed them all. Then I took a long, hard look at my characters. They were flat, lifeless. The dialogue was stiff and unrealistic.
It's one of those things that looks good on paper, but it just doesn't sound right out loud.
I think it needs a little work.
I had seen the scripts from a few good movies, and the dialogue didn't sound like that. So, I went back to the drawing board, and I figured out that to make my characters come to life, I had to write their biographies, make them into real people. After I finished my screenplay, I showed it to some people, and I got a really good response. Some people said some things just to hurt my feelings, and I understood that after a while, but most people gave me very constructive criticism. I was able to go back and make some final continuity tweaks. Now that my unconscious mind was out of the picture, and this was a purely rational phase of screenwriting, I didn't feel like someone knocked the wind out of me. I felt appreciative of the new criticism, and went back and made positive changes. I loved making my short film, working with my actors and my director of photography. I learned more about life and people in 6 months than in 26 years of life. It was a wonderful experience, and when I watched the movie, I knew it was everything I had written, and just about everything I expected. But there was still something missing. It just wasn't me. I was never about murders and crime scenes and blood trails. I liked the movie, but I didn't see it as a representation of who I am. So, I went back to the writing pad and created a new script about something I knew everything about: food service. I remembered everyone's stories, and I figured they would make a nice comedy. It put a smile on my face when I was writing it, and when people read it, they were laughing most of the time. I'm glad I made the first movie because it got me some investment cash to make this one. I learned that you have to write about what you know, and everyone will want to watch it. Who knows where my next story will take me?
Hello and welcome to our script writing section. This is a section that I formally read as opposed to casually talked about like I did with the first section or with the subsequent sections to follow, primarily because the material inside is extremely sensitive and it has to be delivered in a very specific way so as not to confuse the audience. So you won't hear me hesitating or saying anything, kind of like when I was speaking casually to you right now or in the past DVD or in the future DVDs, because I wanted the information to be delivered to you in a very specific way, technically, and so that there's no confusion and no misunderstandings. So I hope you enjoy it. Again, if this is not something that you're interested in, if you're not interested in writing or the actual format of your screenplay, as in the structure of the screenplay, you don't really have to watch this particular section. You can just skip ahead to the production section. This is at your discretion. You can watch it if you like. You don't really need to. Now that you've seen the movie, you can go ahead and just watch the movie production section DVDs without actually going back and seeing this right now, because this is primarily just to instruct writers on how to write. And it primarily discusses the screenplay format or the structure of the screenplay, acts 1, 2, and 3, rather than the formatting of the screenplay, which means where to indent the names and how to put in the character names or the camera movement. That'll come in a later update. But this section is here to embellish the movie, all the things that you've already learned in the movie, but just go ahead and delve deeper into the concepts that you learned about writing, and also to teach you about screenplay structure, acts 1, 2, and 3, and also to teach you a little bit about how to construct more realistic characters. So here we go. Every movie, video, training, DVD, or commercial always begins with one thing: a word. The written word is still, after 4,000 years, the way every performance begins, whether it's film, TV, or a stage play. Being able to creatively string words together still seems miraculous when you see a genius do it. You're in awe of their creativity. Were they born that way? Or did they just do their homework and dedicate themselves to writing? Every good movie started with a good script. Most bad movies started with a bad script. An uninspired director or a poorly cast actor can seldom ruin a good script. But even a master actor working with a veteran director can hardly rescue a bad script. So it all begins with the written word, being able to put words together in a way that pleases people, entertains them, stirs them emotionally, or scares the dickens out of them. Now, some will say that a good screenplay comes from good formatting. That is true to a certain respect. Good formatting will make a screenplay more enjoyable, easier to read, and easier to shoot. However, if formatting was all you needed to make a good screenplay, any formatted story would make a great movie. That's not the case. You should never be frightened of script format. It is wonderful to write your scripts in a manner that fits that structure, so that others in the industry can read it and figure out what you mean. But that shouldn't frighten you from writing at all, or saying, "What's the point of trying? I can't write like that." Sure you can. There is nothing more important than writing clearly, so that others can understand what you mean, and so that you can later understand what you meant. We are primarily audiovisual people. We grew up watching TV, listening to the radio, watching movies. Even the text most of us read is off a computer monitor, usually while watching a movie or listening to the radio. Cameras are beautiful machines, but they are secondary. Writing is much more important. There are many unwatchable, beautiful movies. Too many dolly shots, not enough story. They look beautiful, but they're still unwatchable. There's just no story there. In fact, the reason you're watching this DVD is to better learn how to make audiovisual dramatic presentations, also known as movies. So, it is important to be clear and to learn the components that make up a properly formatted screenplay. They are very simple, and I'll break them down for you. But first, we have to talk about what it takes to become a writer. I used to be scared to death of writing. I'd look at that white paper and go, "My God, how do I start?" I'd have an idea and I just wouldn't know how to start it. But that wasn't really the problem. What I was really scared of is finishing it. What I found out is that if I could just get over that warm blanket of insecurity provided by inaction due to fear of failure, I could write anything. Action puts you at the risk of ridicule. People might make fun of your writing, so you convince yourself not to act, to avoid the social pain of not being taken seriously. How do you get over that warmth of inaction and take a chance on bringing out the writer inside you? You have to remember what it's like to experience things for the first time, to look at the world as a 6-year-old does, free of habit and judgment. We cannot forget the child in us that does all that wonderful creative writing. Each of us is capable of recapturing that early fire of amazement, that brilliant wonder of seeing for the first time. The first step is to understand ourselves psychologically a bit better. We have to understand that inside every intelligent human being, there's a side that does all the dreaming, hoping, and wanting, and there's a side that stops at a red light, pays the taxes, and says, "Yes, sir," to the boss. The first side, the dreaming side, is of course the child in all of us. It's called the unconscious mind. What does that mean, unconscious? Does it mean you can't access it? What good is it then? It actually dreams up fresh perspectives. Young children live in that dream world. Very little reality intrudes. And they sense things about people and places that we have long since chosen to ignore. But we still have to keep our children from touching the hot burner because they don't understand those things yet. Their conscious mind hasn't started developing sets of do's and don'ts for them. They can derive happiness from just about anything because their imagination dominates their mind. They get a bit older, they get hurt a little, and the conscious mind begins to grow stronger, trying its best to defend the fragile unconscious mind against ridicule, pain, humiliation, and guilt. Most children learn that the more they walk in a straight line and follow in established paradigms around them, everything will be just fine. For example, work, commute, eat, sleep. Follow in the path and there will be no guilt or ridicule. Then they get excited the first time they take a creative writing class. Wow, here's someone telling them that at 16 they can behave like they did when they were 6. The writing flows from the unconscious mind, the child within is expressed, because now someone of authority has given them permission to be a child again. The class is over, and for 99% of the kids, they go back to the straight and narrow. Don't dream, do. Don't dream, do. The writing stops, and the unconscious mind retracts into hiding, cheated once again. I am telling you with all my heart, you can go back to being a kid again, but only when you write. I will teach you how to do it. The unconscious mind, we all agree, is a child. The unconscious mind is fragile and tender. It hides in the world of dreams. How do you entice it to come out and write every day? You make everything perfect for it. Have you ever tried to force a child to eat their vegetables? Right away you realize that you're fighting a losing battle, until you put some cheese on there so they can't see the veggies anymore. So it is better to be nice to the child inside rather than force it to come out. To entice the unconscious mind to express itself, you have to understand it better. When are you closest to your dream state? When you're just about to fall asleep or have just woken up from sleep. Yes, there is also the 11th hour, when you're so tired you begin lapsing in and out of consciousness. It's true, sometimes you get that second wind of creativity then, but that is unhealthy, inconsistent, and definitely not any way to live your life. No, there is a better way. For the whole week, starting tomorrow morning, get up 1 hour before you're supposed to. I know, easier said than done, but think about it. You can do it if you put your mind to it. Believe me, it'll only be tough the first 2 days. After that, you'll have so much fun, you'll get up 2 hours early. Now here's what you do when you get up. Immediately leave the room if someone else is also sleeping there. Don't talk to anyone, don't wash your face, don't make coffee, don't do anything constructive. Just walk yourself over to the living room, playroom, kitchen, even the garage, anywhere you can be alone that has a chair and a flat surface, and start writing anything that comes to your mind. If you live in a cold climate, just have a coat or robe waiting for you, with a pen and a writing pad, and a small bottle of water. What you write doesn't have to be a script, or an event, or even English. Just write any sort of babble that comes to your mind. The rules are that you cannot talk to anyone, cannot involve your conscious mind in any way while you do this. Tell your family ahead of time, the night before, that you'll be doing this, and you don't want to be bothered. Tell them this is important to you. If you're blessed with a loving spouse, they will want to check up on you. Tell them to please not do that. Explain that it's an exercise, and you have to have silence. If you have siblings that would never leave you alone, go to the car or the backyard. No radio, no TV, no internet. Don't use a typewriter, and don't use the computer. Use a simple wet ink pen that allows freedom of writing without too much hand pressure, and a simple writing pad with a tough cardboard backing, just like what's in your packet. No pencils, no ballpoint pens, no fountain pens, and no expensive metal pens. Pencils create too much friction, ballpoints require too much pressure, and fountain pens force you to concentrate on penmanship. The only reason I encourage you not to use a computer is because it allows you to go back and edit your work, and then you concentrate on editing your work rather than creating new work straight from your unconscious onto the actual paper. If you feel that you can use the computer or the word processor without actually editing your work and you have confidence in yourself, then go ahead and use the computer. But I would just encourage you, when you first go ahead and get started, to only use a pencil or the pen that we recommend for you to use, because it just makes life a little bit easier at first. If you find that you don't like it, go ahead and use whichever one you like. It might feel silly right now, but when you're up that early and your eyes can barely focus because you haven't rinsed them, and your hands are shivering because you're a bit cold without your coffee and hot shower, you'll appreciate the wet ink pen that requires very little effort to write with. Now here's what you do. Write anything that comes to your mind for 1 whole hour. Don't stop after the first page or read anything that you wrote. Don't correct your spelling, grammar, or punctuation, or content. Again, don't go back and reread your writing. Don't censor yourself in any way. After the time is up, fold over the used pages, mark the date, and hide the writing pad somewhere no one will ever find it. If you feel there's no such hiding place, destroy the papers. It is very important that no one can read these pages. Don't forget, you're protecting the child inside you from ridicule. You're still in a fragile state. Guard your unconscious mind. Use the best abilities of your conscious intelligence to protect it from ridicule, humiliation, guilt, and pain. It is important to do this at the same time every day. You have to get your unconscious mind used to the idea that it can come out and play every morning at, say, 7 a.m. At first it'll seem like work, but only for the first 2 days. On the 3rd day, you'll look forward to it. After about a week of doing this every morning, every day at the same time, you can double your efforts. Get up 2 hours ahead. By then, your writing will have started to take shape. Maybe there's a story that's been brewing in your mind for weeks, and it's now being tapped. Maybe a dream you had is now taking the form of a story. It works every single time, as long as you follow the instructions to the T and you don't delineate from the technique. When you feel like you have the nucleus of a story taking shape right in front of you, usually by the middle of the second week, you can begin to involve your conscious mind in the equation. The next step is to outline your screenplay and make a rough guide that your unconscious mind can follow. And it will, because it feels that for the first time you're allowing it to express itself, and it will work with you a little. Make a short one-page outline, just like the one in your packet. Outline the premise of the story, who the characters are, what are their necessities, what conflicts you think they'll go up against, and how the story will end. In the movie we saw, the premise of the story was that Jake wanted to improve his life. For some reason, he finds it necessary to write and make movies. He takes it upon himself to learn how to do that, but meets many conflicts on the way. The story ends with him beginning his career as a filmmaker. After you do that, make a short one-sentence summary called a logline, just like the short description you see in your TV programming guide. So here's the logline for the movie we just saw. A young man encounters physical and emotional conflict on his voyage to become a filmmaker. Then, set a genre for your story. Action, comedy, horror, thriller, slapstick, drama, or anything that you like. Our movie was primarily a dramatic instructional film. The audience wants a consistent theme. They will tolerate a few ups and downs, but they'll feel cheated if halfway into their romantic comedy, a main character is taken ill, and the rest of the movie is spent in the hospital with the character dying from cancer and everyone crying. Now go back to the writing. At this point, you can refer to your story as a first draft. Write that on the pad, just like Jake did. You have the beginning of a story, and you know where it's going. You know who the major characters are, and what are their necessities. You have built a framework that will guide you all the way to the ending. Now, your first draft is ready to fit a structure that is well established, accepted, and easily communicated for hundreds of years. Just about every successful film that you've ever seen has followed the screenplay structure at some point in its development. It is based on stage plays for theater, and the commonly known Acts 1, 2, and 3. That is the core of creating drama, which literally means action, as originally created by the Greeks in 534 BC. The stories used to be about Greek gods and nobility, but through the years the idea evolved, and the best drama, tragedy, and comedy screenplays were written about regular people being thrown into irregular circumstances. So the screenplay is linear, which means it is written in a straight line as it happens with no flashbacks or wild tangents. That doesn't mean it has to play that way. Once you finish your screenplay, you can shift things around. A scene that happens at the beginning of a screenplay can be removed and inserted halfway through the story to reveal events that took place before the story began. In our movie, there's a dream sequence when Jake first breaks through the fiber of reality and sees himself in the scene with the detectives. That is a flash forward. We are seeing ahead to the time when he will be directing his actors. The flash forward was a scene that was added to the screenplay to remind Jake of his necessities and to remind the audience just how badly he wants to make movies. So let's define a scene, specifically the flash forward dream sequence. A scene is a set of action or dialogue in a screenplay, like a mini screenplay, and it has its own beginning, middle, and end. The scene has to do one or more of the following things. Number 1, driving movement can be added to the story. The flash forward helped the audience to viscerally understand Jake's necessities. Number 2, conflict can be created. Since there was no dialogue in that scene, there was no interpersonal conflict, but we learned about Jake's conflict with himself, his need to write conflicting with his inability to write. Number 3, new characters can be brought in. The scene brought in the characters of the detectives, and later we will learn that they were actually actors that Jake will hire to play a part in his movie. Number 4, enhancement of an existing character. We learn that Jake has a remarkable imagination, but he is not able to harness it at will, but only during times of extreme stress. He can't function like an artist and create new ideas whenever he wants. Even though he has heart, his mind is untrained. Number 5, suspense can be created. After the scene is through, we are prepared for another visceral experience, which is the near miss at the hill. The emotional flash-forward scene prepared the audience for another emotional experience. Suspense is best created by a push-pull method, where you create a tense scene, push forward, then allow the audience to relax for a few scenes, pull back. Then bring in another tense scene, slowly building tension until the ending of the movie. This is also called dramatic contrast, and we'll discuss it later. Number 6. Awareness of some aspect of the film can be increased. The scene accomplished that by introducing new characters and exploring Jake's necessities. Number 7. Mood can be created. The scene created a suspenseful mood and prepared us for the accident scene. Mood can also be changed with dialogue and lighting. Number 8. Theme of the story can be pushed forward. The theme, as we set up in our logline earlier, a young man encounters physical and emotional conflict on his voyage to become a filmmaker. This scene illustrated that Jake isn't strolling through a field of roses on his voyage to become a writer, but is frightened of his abilities and the pressure to express himself. A scene can start in the beginning, middle, or end. It is up to you to determine if you can pull off starting a scene in the middle or the end. The dream sequence started in the beginning with Jake coming home, lying in bed, dreaming about his movie. We could have started this scene by jumping straight to the dream sequence and then showing him waking up from it, but that may have been confusing, and would also exclude the visceral experience of physically entering into the dream world by virtue of shattering its fiber. So as long as one of the last 8 subjects that we talked about can be satisfied in a scene, then it is a successful scene. A sequence, as it sounds, is a series of scenes back to back, also with its own beginning, middle, and end. All the scenes are connected either by time, place, or theme. Think about the sequence at the beginning of the movie when Jake is helping customers, saying goodbye to his coworkers, and bowling. It illustrates Jake's personality, habits, relationships with people, and how he spends his time alone. It is a sequence connected by time elements and theme rather than place. It happens in different places, but it has the same theme, which is that Jake is a good person caught in a bad situation. The scenes happen chronologically, back to back. Now that we've learned what scenes and sequences are, we're ready to study the structure of the screenplay. The structure of the screenplay is like this. Act 1, just like it sounds, this is the act that introduces the screenplay. It is 30 minutes long in a 2-hour movie. In our 45-minute movie, it was about 10 minutes long. In the first half of Act 1, the audience has to know the major characters, where they are, and what they're going to be doing for the rest of the movie. Act 1 has to fully explore the major characters' necessities. Jake is the main character in the movie, but there are other major characters, like Rachel and his manager. So Act 1 has to fully explore all their necessities. That way the audience will understand exactly what they're after for the rest of the movie. For instance, Jake wants to be a better writer and make movies. Rachel wants to help him and have a relationship. The manager wants Jake to work hard and not daydream. It sounds tough to try to accomplish all that in the first 15 minutes of a 2-hour feature, but it's really not that tough. The reason is that just about every good 2-hour movie you've ever seen did this in the first 15 minutes. So you have a lot of models to go by. This is why it's even tougher to accomplish that in a shorter film. You only have 5 minutes in a 40-minute movie. Act 2 comes a quarter of the way into the movie. After Act 1, the audience will know your main character, your major characters, and what are all their necessities. Act 2 is where all the major characters have to overcome conflict while trying to get the things they find necessary. The conflict makes things difficult for your characters, just like life does for everybody. It's never easy to accomplish what you want in life. And just as in life, the characters have to get up and fight for what they want. It is more realistic and more interesting. Most people, and I do mean 99%, don't want to watch movies about how easy life is for the characters, and how everything is going just fine in their lives. They want to see them jump through hoops to get their brass ring. Conflict makes the audience go oops and oh no. They can't wait for the next one. They are plot hurdles or cliffhangers. If the character wants to get what is necessary to him, he has to overcome the conflicts involved. These events make the character have to think about the next move, and the audience is right alongside, scratching their heads, asking themselves, what the heck would I do in that situation? We understand Jake better when he doesn't slap off his manager's hand and say something smart, but just accepts his fate and keeps on working. You may not approve of that, but that's the kind of person he is. Conflict is the base of drama, and the character's reaction to it tells you a lot about what kind of person he is. Writing creates both physical and mental conflicts. Jake has to fight his physical fatigue in order to write in his lucid state, but he can't. Eventually he learns that if he gets up early and immediately starts writing, he can remain in that dream state for hours. So he circumvented a physical conflict and created a better situation for himself through research. Writing is a mental conflict because a writer is constantly faced with a blank white paper. Sometimes it's easy to start a project, but it takes a lot of mental dedication to finish any artistic work, including writing. Jake starts all his scripts easily, usually in response to physical events in his life. But as soon as he runs out of time and energy on the first day, he finds it very difficult to pick up the pace the next day. He writes in binges, which are all short-lived and lack meaning. When he figures out that he has to isolate his conscious mind from the equation by writing very early in the morning, he is then able to overcome the mental conflict that keeps him from writing the following day. Sometimes a main character like Jake can overcome extremely difficult conflict with the help of another major character, like Rachel. Remember how on several occasions she helped him through very difficult situations, like when he gave up on writing altogether, or when he reached a standstill on character creation. Conflict is important. How much fun would a spy movie be if all the doors automatically unlocked and there was no poison gas in the room? It would just be a guy walking through all these neat sets, getting what he wants and walking right back out. And while we wish we could do that in our lives sometimes, it just doesn't make for good storytelling. You need the conflict. Conflict hurdles can't all be the same height, and that's no fun. The audience doesn't like it either. Some of them have to be mental, some physical, and some have to provoke confrontations with other characters to make things really tough to figure out. Also, it's more fun if they get harder as the plot thickens. At the beginning of Act 2, just when the story seems to be going predictably in a straight line, it has to suddenly take a hard right. The ancient Greeks who created the concept of drama called it a peripeteia, or a sudden change. It stops the action moving in that direction and kicks it in a whole different one. Why is that important? Sudden change is unpredictable, and being unpredictable is one of the foundations of creating good drama, and thus good movies. The audience never knows what to expect. So once again, the first peripeteia is at the end of Act 1, and it fires up Act 2, which has all the major conflict scenes. In our movie, that major conflict occurs when the SUV comes around the corner and almost hits Jake on page 10, a quarter of the way through the movie, right after Act 1. It stops the action of the story from progressing down a path of predictable self-pity and starts Jake on his voyage to becoming a writer. Usually, there's another difficult conflict in the middle of Act 2, which also happens to be the middle of the movie. That changes things quite a bit for the main character. In our movie, that was the part when Jake gives up his quest. Another peripeteia closes Act 2 and starts up Act 3, which begins the winding down of the story into the ending. Remember, a peripeteia is when the story takes a hard right, totally unpredictable, sudden change. Act 3 comes 3/4 of the way into the movie. This is the hardest act to write because this is where your major characters live happily ever after or die in the last firefight. It is also the hardest one to write because by now you love your characters so much you don't want anything to happen to them. They already went through the mild conflicts in Act 2, and now here comes the final showdown. Is the boxer going to win the heavyweight belt? Is the student going to pass the medical exams? Are the astronauts going to be able to fix their spaceship and come home? It is when all the major characters' true colors come out and the hero emerges. It is important to know what's going to happen in the last act before you even write the first act. That way you can write intelligently, create little clues along the way, and challenge your character in ways that make the final prize mean so much more. You can use tools like foreshadowing to give the audience little clues about what's going to happen next, without actually giving away the story. So let's go over the components of the screenplay again. First quarter of the movie is Act 1. It sets up the characters and their necessities. Second and third quarters of the movie are Act 2, which has all the conflicts the characters have to go through to reach their aspirations. Fourth and last quarter of the movie is Act 3. Do they get what they want or die trying? In between Acts 1 and 2, a major change, the first peripetia, the sudden change. In the middle of Act 2, a very difficult conflict. In between Acts 2 and 3, another major change, the second peripetia, sudden change. In closing, the first half of Act 1 has to completely introduce all the major characters and what they want. It's usually the most critical part, and you can either win or lose your audience in those first few minutes. The second half of Act 3 is the part everybody will be thinking about when they go home. So the first half of Act 1 will win the audience's attention for the run of the movie. The second half of Act 3 will win them over for the whole week. They'll be telling their family and coworkers how cool the movie was. Win them in the intro, wow them at the end. And you don't have to do it with big car crashes, even though that's fun too. You don't need to win over the whole range of the audience's perception, just their hearts and minds. So how do you win hearts and minds? By using good characters. Characters are the most important part of any screenplay. But what comes first, the characters or the story? What do you create first, a wholesome, complete character with a history and dreams, or a unique story that has good characters in it? That is up to your imagination. When an idea comes to me, I see it as a series of images, a sequence, just like the opening sequence we talked about earlier, revealing Jake's character and personality. Then I embed characters into that sequence and I break it into a beginning, middle, and end. I then insert the major story changes, fine-tune the outline, and get to writing the screenplay. Some people see the character first, a unique individual, someone you met, someone you read about, or maybe someone you just dreamt up after reading a good story in a newspaper. Either method can be used as the first building block for a successful screenplay. If you dream up scenes or sequences, you create the outline first, then create the characters. If you dream up characters first, you sculpt them, then make an outline. Whether the chicken comes before the egg or vice versa, to write a good screenplay you have to make solid real characters and an outline for your story that follows the form we already talked about. So how do we build deep and believable characters? How can we challenge them so appropriately and dramatically? We have to know them inside out, so that their emotions are genuine, their actions are realistic. And it comes through. The actress that picks up your script to prepare for her role will know that you did your homework and created for her a character that is dynamic and robust. She is dynamic in that her actions are realistic. The actress doesn't have to create situations in her mind to make herself believe that her character would do what the script says she's going to do. It is there on paper in the dialogue, and it makes sense. The character is robust in that she does not say things that are not in keeping with her personality. So the actress doesn't have to think to herself, I just know my character wouldn't say that to the bad guys. So we need to create dynamic and robust characters, and to do that, we need to know them. How do we know fictional characters? We haven't even written the first act. The characters don't even have their voices yet. After the first act, the character speaks naturally in your mind. You know what they would or would not say or do. But you have to know that beforehand, and the way you do that is to start from scratch. In a movie, nothing can happen inside the character's mind. It is not a novel. They have to say it, or do it, or it didn't happen. Yes, sometimes a lot can be said with a cold stare, or a longing gaze. But that only gets you so far. And those devices are only unique to the audience when they already know the characters well enough through action and dialogue. So, to set up a real character, we need to know beforehand what they would say in a certain situation. What better way to do that than to ask them questions and see how they respond? In your materials packet, there are some forms for each of your main characters to fill out. Now, these are not for policeman number 2 or grocery shopper number 4. They are for your major characters, and if you really want to go further, you can use them for anyone with dialogue. No one cares what the character thinks he will do when confronted with conflict. All they care about is what would he physically say or do. The key to opening up Jake's character and making him into a real person with flesh and blood emotions is to reveal to the audience, number 1, how he talks and acts around other people. Does he speak differently to certain people than to others? Does he intonate his voice up or down in pitch when trying to make a point? Or is he monotone? Is there a tremble in his voice when he feels uncomfortable speaking to a person of authority? Does he relax around friends, or is it the other way around? Number 2. When he wants something, how does he get it? Morally, immorally, cleverly, childishly. Does he beg for it or steal it, or work hard and buy it? Exploring the character's necessities is where you get to be a creative writer. How he deals with his physical barriers and his attitude while doing his job all comes from his biography, and it helps the audience understand him. Number 3. How does he cope with his own emotions? If he really wants something, but the road ahead is long and cobbled, and he doesn't have a lot of confidence in himself, how does he deal with that overbearing fear of failure so that he can still get what he wants? To make good challenges, you have to know your characters. And knowing your characters in a screenplay means knowing what they would say or do. If a character feels sad, he can't act sad. Trying not to act sad while feeling sorrow is the best way to show sadness. Behaving in a way that tries to take your mind off of it, like when people act happy. Acting sad is more of a tantrum than an adult emotional display. It leads to indicating, in other words, trying to act. But that is not acting. It is amateur, and it comes from a lack of understanding of the character, because the character was written flat with no life. Remember when Jake was drunk? A drunk person in real life tries to act sober. The last thing a drunk wants is for other people to know that he's drunk. But he's drunk, so his senses are dulled and his movement is impaired. How does an actor act drunk? He practices feeling drunk and acting sober, and embeds that into his character so that the behavior is realistic. Now, this is not permission to go and get drunk in order to explore a character. An actor does not have to get shot to know how to act like he's dying. Much experience can be gained from observation and research rather than first-hand knowledge. A major star doesn't get drunk before he steps out of his trailer and onto a professional production set that costs $15,000 every minute. No one would work with him. However, he knows what it's like to be drunk, whether from experience, observation, or research, and he's worked with the director on exactly how his character would portray being drunk. So the character he's playing becomes realistic and believable, dynamic and robust. We discussed other ways to understand your character inside and out. Watch how they pass the time when they're alone, how they behave with their coworkers, how they behave with friends, and how they interact with their family. Think about all the things that we saw Jake doing to help us understand his character. So what is the most important block when building a character? The keystone that holds the whole arch together. Convictions. Convictions are things that your character knows to be true no matter what. The sky's blue and the water's clear. You have to die and you have to pay taxes. What is the character convinced of beyond the shadow of any doubt? When you know how this character talks to and behaves with other people at work and at home, gets what he wants, copes with his own emotions, and behaves alone, then you're ready to give him convictions. That is what helps you create a whole individual, inside and out, so that he behaves and talks with conviction. If someone challenges his beliefs, how does he react? Violently or calmly explaining his viewpoint? Does he try and force his point, or is he happy knowing that he has said his piece and now it's time to move on? Is someone able to shake his belief, or is it entrenched in his heart? When he failed again and again, he just kept on trying, never gave it up. In order to write a solid screenplay with dynamic and robust characters, you have to know them inside and out. You have to pour in all the knowledge, emotions, and convictions, close the tab, and move ahead. That effort shows in every bit of dialogue, and it translates into the audience through the actor. Another device used to explore the character's reactions, actions, behavior, and convictions is new events. When something occurs in a character's life not based on interpersonal conflicts or reactions to dialogue, but something totally new and major, how does the character react to it? Essentially, how would a character react to sudden change or a peripeteia? How does Jake react to the SUV almost running him over? He doesn't cower in bed and hope the bad images will go away. He uses his negative emotions to write. Of course, at that point, he still doesn't have the tools to finish his idea. but the sudden change sets him on a course towards his eventual salvation from mediocrity. As I mentioned before, once you understand all these devices and how they help you build dynamic, robust characters, you'll be ready to start writing the screenplay itself. Once you begin, especially if it's your first professionally written screenplay, you'll find that the dialogue might feel quirky or off base. After you finish your first draft and read it out loud with someone, you'll immediately notice which phrases don't quite fit right and which others need a little adjusting. When writing your first draft, don't worry about spelling, grammar, or punctuation. Don't worry if the characters take on a life of their own and begin to speak in words you don't agree with. Just let them. This is the critical phase of honesty, and you need to let the characters speak their minds. You can always rewrite things in the second draft and adjust them. But for now, the story is in your mind in a certain way, and it has to come out that way. Dialogue is very important because it reveals the personality of the characters and how they interact with each other. It exposes them for the good or bad people they are, drives the script, and wins the audience. This movie was entirely played in the main character's mind, because it was written for instructional purposes. But it still has dialogue in it that reveals Jake's character and that of the other actors. The audience has to feel that they've known someone like that, or that they are that character. Otherwise, the character is lost in cliché. So now you have all the basic tools necessary for building a great character and a great story. Okay, thank you for watching the writing section of our DVD series. Coming up is going to be the movie production series, and that entire series has many repetitions of the same white balance and gamma settings in different settings and environments. This is not unlike the film that anyone would show you to teach any difficult task. The repetition is similar to a film school classroom environment, where the student is exposed to the same information in different situations until it becomes second nature. It is the same reason they run soldiers through basic training, and repeat the same concepts again and again in different combat situations. That way, when the student gets on the set, he or she will not panic or default to bad habits like auto white balance, auto iris, standard gamma, and standard color matrix. The student will know exactly what the final image with that gamma setting will look like when it gets to the DVD stage. That is why we keep repeating everything again and again, but in different situations. That way you will know exactly what the same gamma setting will look like in several different situations, as in indoor, outdoor, etc., etc. If you don't feel like going through the white balance settings and the gamma settings every single time, you can just fast forward past that portion. It is just there for your information, and it's all there for you to pick and choose what you actually want to learn from. And that's what your DVD guide is for. Go through the DVD guide and see which sections you actually want to learn about the most. You can skip to those sections if you like. However, the power of the series itself will only be felt when you watch everything all together, and then after you're done with the entire series, then you'll feel like you've actually walked on the set with us and that you've spent a whole week with us, and then after that all was said and done, we sat down and explained to you everything that we did during the whole filming and then after the fact, and you feel like you've actually made the movie with us. And from that, there's going to be an information overload, kind of, so to speak, that will result in you remembering all these concepts later on in the future. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. You're in control of everything at this stage. You can go ahead and watch whatever you like. But that's just my recommendation, is to actually watch the entire series in its completion. But if you like to pick and choose, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Just go ahead and fast forward to the sections that you're mostly interested in. Hello and welcome to our short script formatting section. In this particular section, we're going to learn a little bit about how to format your script, primarily so that you can submit it to a studio or a production company. Here is a sample of the front cover of a script. Keep the title nice and short, easy to remember, and interesting. The title is between 20 to 25 lines down from the top of the page. Then you put in "by" about 2 lines down. Then you put in your name about 2 lines below that. The title has to be all caps. Your name can be caps and lowercase. And then on the bottom left-hand corner, you should have your name, your address, and your telephone number. There should be no other information on the front of the script. Period. End of story. It should be on plain white paper with plain black Courier font. If you have an agent, they may replace your name with their name. The title is not centered in the page, and there's a reason for that. Eventually, you're going to 3-hole punch this paper on the left-hand side. When you do that, the paper will bend, and from that crease line over to the right-hand side of the paper, the title will be centered. You're just going to put in a 3-hole punch on the left-hand side. You're going to put in 2 brass brads, one in the top, one in the bottom, nothing in the middle. That makes it easy for people to take the brads out and photocopy your script. You can put in a cover if you like, or not. If you put in front and back covers to protect the front and back pages, just make sure they're plain covers with no color or texture. This is the first page of your script and pretty much how it should look like. I know this is not going to come out very well on your screen, so I'm going to skip to the top half immediately. All I wanted to draw your attention to is the distribution of dialogue versus description. It should be about a 50-50 relationship, but it should lean more towards dialogue, and make sure that descriptive paragraphs are as short as possible and broken up into lines. This is the top half of the first page. Make sure you have no typographical or grammatical errors in your script. They draw attention themselves right away and they make it seem amateurish. Whenever you put in a transition, let's just say fade in, fade out, or dissolve, it has to be justified to the right-hand side of the page. The distance from the top of the first page down to the first line of text is about an inch. The distance of the left-hand side of the page to the text is 1.5 inches. From the right side of the page to the text is a half an inch. The text should always be 12-point Courier or Courier New, and the paper should always be 8.5 by 11 pure white. No color paper, just plain white paper, no parchment, nothing fancy. Looking at the bottom of the page, there should be an inch from the bottom of the paper to the line of text, but only a half an inch to the word continued if it's there. Continued is a footer, which tells the reader that the scene is being continued on the following page. Going back to the top of the page, let's talk about the first line of text. It says int, high-rise, dash day. Int stands for interior, as opposed to an exterior shot. High-rise is the location. Then you put in a dash, and then the time of day, be it day or night. This line is called a scene heading, and it's very important to put that at the top of each scene or each location, so that the reader always knows where this is taking place and when. Also notice that it's in all caps, and most script writing software will do all this formatting for you automatically. You just type away. The next line after that, we introduce our first character, Jane. This is called a line of action. Anytime you have a descriptive paragraph, it's called lines of action. Anytime you introduce a character for the first time, you have to capitalize the name. That way the reader knows that this is the first time they encounter this character. Right after that, you can either put in a comma or parentheses and put in the age of the character. Then put in a brief description of this person. Don't be verbose. Don't go on and on about their hair color and eye color, unless it pertains to the script. If it does, put it in. If it doesn't, just leave it out and try to be as brief as possible. Put in a comma and describe what she's doing. So she's a successful lawyer in expensive attire. She sits in her office typing at her laptop, and she's listening to eclectic music. Only mention music if it actually pertains to the script or tells you something about that particular character. If the character is listening to a certain music, then you can put that in. But don't tell the producer what kind of score you're envisioning for that film. That's very amateurish. Then the phone rings at her desk. Whenever you have any kind of an audio sound effect, you have to capitalize it so it rings at her desk. You should also do that for any kind of visual special effects as well too. So the phone is ringing at her desk and a small digital photograph appears in the caller ID screen. We didn't specify if this is a cell phone or a landline because it really doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to the script, so the director can have fun with that. The important thing is it shows a picture of the caller. The fact that her phone can show the picture of the caller just tells you something about her character and that she likes technology. Also notice we didn't put in close-up or some other kind of shot description for the script. If you're going to produce your own script, then you can put in all the information in there that you want. However, if you're shopping around for funding for your movie, or if you're going to sell the script, leave out all the shot descriptions. It's not your job. There are other people down the line, like line producers, who will sit down and number the script, number all the scenes, and also add all the different shot descriptions with the director. The best way to make a reader feel like there's a close-up there is by describing something in detail. So we capitalized caller ID screen because that might be a special effect later on in post. Then we described what's appearing in a caller ID screen. A small digital photo appears. So by every once in a while putting in details like that, you can guide the reader's mind into a close-up. After that, we introduce our second character, Shannon. Again, her name is in all caps because it's the first time we introduce her. We put in her age in parentheses, and then we say a few words about her. Clumsy, struggling realtor. 3 words is really all you need to describe someone for the first time. You can learn other things about them later on in the script, but that's really all you need to bring a person into the script. So now we're going to have some dialogue, and the first person to say anything is going to be Jane. We're staying in her location, so we're going to stay at the high-rise day location. We put in a new line for her character. Her name is in all caps when she talks, and a professional screenwriting software will automatically tab over 4 times to get her name into the proper placement, which is also equivalent to 37 spaces. Then for her actual dialogue, it's just 2 tab spaces. It's not centered. I know most people type in a centered kind of way, but it's not centered. None of the dialogue or the character names are centered. They all get tabbed over a certain amount of times as though you're typing on a typewriter. So the next person that's speaking is Shannon. Of course, it's in line with Jane's name. It's been tabbed over 4 times. And because we're still at Jane's location, we haven't moved over to Shannon's location. We're just hearing Shannon coming through the phone. We put in OS after Shannon's name, which means off screen. This tells the reader that we're staying at Jane's point of view and we're not going over to Shannon's location. Next, Jane responds to her. She says, "No problem, I'm already looking at the bid. Nice location. Are the roads bad?" So this tells us something about Jane's character, that she's okay with Shannon being late, and it also tells us something about Shannon's character, that she's pretty much always late and Jane's kind of used to that. It also tells us something in a few words about their relationship. It's a business relationship. They might also be friends, but in this particular case, they're conducting a business meeting. Also, depending on how the actress playing Jane says, "Are the roads bad?" it tells you a lot about whether she's actually concerned about Shannon or not. If it's crucial to the story, you can tell that to the reader. You can say how she's saying it, but most of the time it's not going to be crucial to the story, and you should leave it out for the actual actress's interpretation. Now we're switching to a different location. Int luxury car dash day. So it's an interior of a luxury car and it's daytime also. You might say to yourself, well, of course it's daytime. It's daytime for Jane. Why shouldn't it be daytime for Shannon? Well, what if Jane's in the United States and Shannon's in Australia? Then it would be totally different. Also, what if the line producer cuts out a piece of the script and gives it to someone and says, make this scene happen? Could be a second unit director doesn't have access to the entire script. That person needs to know if it's night or day. Also, it tells the reader that we're switching to a whole different location and to a different point of view. Next, we put in Shannon's name in all caps, 4 tabs over from the left. Then we put in her dialogue, 2 tabs over. Again, the software does all this for you automatically. Now, in the second half of the page, we go back to Jane's location, int high-rise day. And Jane says, "Isn't it weird that it's still raining in Southern California in April?" That tells you something else about her character. Shannon just got done telling her that she's already passed 3 accidents, but that doesn't faze Jane one bit. All she cares about is still raining. Now we're back to int luxury car day, so that we know that we're back in Shannon's world, and she says, it's this whole global warming thing. So we understood a lot more about these two characters' relationships. Jane's very successful and doesn't really care about much. Shannon's not so successful and coddles Jane. Okay, the next thing she says is, "Hang on," and there's an exclamation mark. We didn't have to put in yelling or Shannon yelling to really kind of tell the reader that she's actually yelling at this point. All we had to really do is just put in an exclamation mark and it tells the same thing. Try to avoid parentheticals or telling the reader how the actress is supposed to act at that point. And even when it's crucial to the story, like it is right here, try to just put an exclamation mark instead. Or try to put it in as a line of action. Now we come to our first exterior. Exterior luxury car dash day. So we're still with the car, but we moved outside of it. In this case, this was crucial to the story to show how she's jerking the car from lane to lane. Also, we put in a dash, and then we put in tires squeal for a sound effect. Then we go back into the car, interior luxury car day. We put in another line of action, which is the phone is still pressed to Shannon's face. We go to dialogue. "Get off the phone and drive, you jerk." So we didn't have to put in Shannon yelling at the top of her lungs. You can already see it, that she's yelling at the other driver. So we just learned 3 more things about Shannon's character with just 1 line of action and 1 line of dialogue. What we learned is that she's reactive, she's an unsafe driver, she doesn't care if she yells into the phone while she's talking to people, and also she's a hypocrite. She's on the phone, but she's yelling at someone else who's on the phone and driving. Next we go to interior high-rise day, and Jane is deafened. She moves the phone away from her ear. So obviously we've preset what's going to happen in this meeting. Jane is not going to be in a very good mood because not only is Shannon late, but she's also screaming into her ear, and we know what kind of person Jane is. She doesn't like this kind of behavior. Now we go to page 2. Notice that there's a number at the top right-hand side of the page. It doesn't say P or page 2 or anything like that. It just says 2 and then dot. Because the scene is continuing from the page before, we have a continued header at the top left-hand side of the page. This tells the reader that we're still in the high-rise location. Now the software knew that, and it automatically added a continued footer on page 1 and a continued header on page 2. Now we go back to the interior of the luxury car day, and Shannon says, "Sorry about that." That's primarily all that you need to know about formatting, so you can go ahead and get started writing your own script. Do yourself a favor and keep your script under 120 pages. The reason that we use Courier 12 and the reason that we use 8.5 by 11 sheets and formatting software is because each page translates to about 1 minute of screen time, roughly. It's better to keep your script nice and short rather than too long and nobody's going to read it. Thank you for watching our editing section. This is going to be a short and painless introduction to the broad principles of editing. Let's start with talking about what a good movie really is. A good movie is the result of marriage of purpose and technique. It's a collection of intelligent, talented people who are all very well practiced at their respective techniques, coming together with one unified purpose in mind, to tell a story that will live on and grow larger than the sum of their individual talents. Editing is the final technique that unifies all these people's respective talents. There are 2 major types of editing, linear and non-linear. Non-linear is what started the whole principle of editing. When you think about cutting film, you're cutting film into little strips, into little sections, and you can take that film strip and splice it into any other part of the movie that you want. It's real freedom. Before we had nonlinear editing computers like we do today, you literally had to hang your 35mm film in a bin called the film bin. Now the film bin is more of a conceptual housing that is used to store small clips of digital information, and you don't have to splice the film physically with a razor anymore to make a cut. Nonlinear computers have given us true freedom. They've moved us away from linear editing, which was where video first started. Linear editing was very laborious. You couldn't just cut a piece of tape out physically and actually put it into a different part of the movie. It would leave a very clear mark on the final movie as a large glitch that would show up on people's screen. You would have to use two VCRs. VCR 1, for instance, would have your actual movie in it. VCR 2 would have the clip that you wanted to insert into your movie. You would have to literally do an insert edit on the fly, which means you would actually cut the video information into your movie on the fly. And if there was any glitch in the timing or if it wasn't perfect, it would leave a very distinct hit in your movie that was very visible. It also required expensive VCRs that need constant attention and maintenance. Enter the computer and nonlinear editing. True nonlinear editing as we have it today can be done so affordably that anyone can really do it. All you need is an inexpensive computer, an editing software, and a way to get the footage into the computer. In the past few years, computers have finally allowed us to return back to the freedom that a film editor used to have back in the day. The film editor could, at will, anytime he or she wanted to, take a film strip from the film bin and splice it into the sequence at will. The advantage that we have now with computers, which is why most people use computers even when cutting film, is that we can make a never-ending number of sequences, and we never have to cut a single piece of film. Which means we can preview our idea. We can cut a sequence one way and then try it another way, but without destroying the original sequence. So any segment of film or video that we have can be called a clip or a film clip. We can drag that film clip into the timeline, which is the master sequence. We can either splice it or insert it into the timeline and push the other pieces of the timeline apart, or we can overwrite an existing clip that's in the timeline. Now don't confuse making a cut in the film or making a splice with a rough cut. A sequence can be considered a rough cut when it can be considered the entire movie viewed front to back. Now if you were cutting film, your rough cut generally would not include any kind of optical effects. Optical effects include the fade in, fade out, and all the dissolves and the wipes in between. So again, if you were cutting film, your opticals wouldn't come in at this stage. First you would make a final cut. The final cut is just a rough cut after it's been re-edited and revised probably 100 times, or maybe twice. So after the final cut is finished, we have what we call picture lock. It's the same thing as saying that we lock the movie, or lock the picture portion of the movie. At that point in the film editing process, you would hand the movie over to the sound department, and they would add in the sound effects, music, and all those other sound elements that make a movie spectacular. It's also called audio sweetening, and if you talk to a lot of film people, they'll tell you, audio is 51% of the finished movie, which is just a way of saying that without the audio, the movie will not have the same impact. At this point in the film process, the opticals are mixed in and you have an answer print. After all the final corrections, you have what's called a release print. That's what the audience will actually see in the theater. Now that we know how the film process works, let's discuss how it applies to computer editing. The advantage of using a computer for editing is that you don't have to wait until the answer print stage to see your opticals in action. You can add dissolves, wipes, and any other optical effect that you want right as you're editing the rough cut. This is a very powerful tool at your disposal that was not available to film editors before. They had to pre-visualize how a dissolve was going to look before they even got it back from the lab. Another advantage with computerized editing is that you can mix in your audio and sound effects as you work. You're essentially making the answer print in the rough cut stage. That is generally why when you've arrived at the final cut stage, or when you have picture lock, you also have a release print. It's true at that point you can go back in and do color correction, or you can send your movie out to have it professionally color corrected or audio sweetened. But most people on the low budget end up doing everything by themselves or with the help of friends on their machines. So you might end up putting your movie on a hard drive and handing that hard drive to your friend to work on the soundtrack. You could simultaneously put it on another hard drive and hand it to another friend to work on the color correction. That means that one of your friends just turned into a sound department and the other one's turned into the lab. In that case, you don't have an answer print until you've actually gotten back all the footage from your friends, configured it into a final cut, and that has now become your answer print. So the scope of this section is just to basically introduce you to all these principles and to also introduce you to some very basic editing principles. Generally, when you pre-visualize a movie, it's usually a scene that is a sequence of shots. For instance, you have a wide establishing shot, cut to a close shot of person A, cut to the reverse angle from person B, cut back to the wide shot and exit the scene. So you go and film this footage in the field, bring it back to the studio, it's time to edit. The first step is called assembly. You assemble the shots together in a certain sequence that fits the way it was pre-visualized in your mind. Then you watch the assemble.
Jake, this doesn't sound like something anyone would say.
I know. It's one of those things that looks good on paper, but it just doesn't sound right out loud. Okay, how about this? You know how on a novel they have the book jacket with the bio of the author on the back?
Yeah.
What if I do that for each of my characters, like a backstory?
You might feel that the wide shot was on too long, or maybe one of the close-ups was on too short. So then you trim the wide shot to be shorter, and you trim the close-ups to be a little bit longer. In nonlinear editing, you can easily do that just by moving the sliders back and forth at the end of each clip. Just consult your manual for your particular software to learn exactly how to trim. So you watch your assembled sequence again.
Jake, this doesn't sound like something anyone would say.
I know. It's one of those things that looks good on paper, but it just doesn't sound right out loud. Okay, how about this? You know how on a novel they have the book jacket with the bio of the author on the back?
Yeah.
What if I do that for each of my characters, like a backstory?
You like the cuts, but you want to get a reaction shot of person A while person B is still talking. So you find the appropriate reaction shot from person A and you insert it over person B's dialogue. This procedure is called an overlap.
Jake, this doesn't sound like something anyone would say.
I know. It's one of those things that looks good on paper, but it just doesn't sound right out loud. Okay, how about this? You know how on a novel they have the book jacket with the bio of the author on the back?
Yeah.
What if I do that for each of my characters, like a backstory?
You can trim your overlap back and forth until it's just right. Trimming the in point of the overlap clip is called trimming the head of the clip. Trimming the out point is called trimming the tail of the clip. Heads and tails, pretty easy stuff. So now you have an assembled sequence. Now that scene is finished and you can move on to the sequence that pertains to the next scene. You have a rough cut when you've assembled all the individual little sequences of all the scenes together into one large sequence. Now let's just say you wanted one scene to play out at the same time as another scene so that you can show them both happening at the same time. You can use a technique called intercutting or cross-cutting to cut both scenes together so that they play out at the same time as though they were happening at the same time, and according to one of the great film pioneers, Pudovkin, create one of three different scenarios: contrast, parallelism, or simultaneity. When you intercut two different scenes together, where the character in one scene is experiencing a starkly different set of circumstances than the character in the other scene, it makes each character's set of circumstances appear more powerful. That's contrast. For instance, think about Jake's dark, bleak, unhappy existence when contrasted with Rachel's happy, bright, and fulfilled life. When you intercut two separate scenes, but you're not trying to draw attention to the difference in the circumstances, that's parallelism. When you have parallel situations, and the outcome of one situation depends on the other, and you keep cross-cutting between them to lead to more suspense, that's simultaneity. These are principles set down by Pudovkin back in the 20s, over 80 years ago, and yet we're still using the same principles when we cut movies today. Pudovkin, Kuleshov, Eisenstein, and D.W. Griffith were four film pioneers that advanced the use of montage. Montage simply means editing in French, but it was taken up by these pioneers as a means of expressing the type of editing that does not revolve around continuity. Meaning you're not just assembling a scene anymore, going from wide shot to close-up to reverse angle and back to wide shot. You could assemble a montage sequence with shots that are completely unrelated. Montage sequences generally lack dialogue, but they usually have sound effects and/or music. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think of a montage is Rocky training for his big fight. You have all these shots of him training that are totally unconnected. One time he's doing push-ups, one time he's chasing the chicken around, then he's running through the streets of Philly. But the montage makes an emotional impact that's greater than the sum of its parts, especially when it's coupled with powerful music. If you want to do more research on the types of montage that are available to you as a filmmaker, you should research Eisenstein. He created 5 major techniques that are being used still today in just about every major film ever made. The last major editing technique that we're going to talk about is actually the lack of editing. It's another French word called mise-en-scène, or mise-en-scène, and what it means to us today is literally one continuous uncut shot replacing an entire scene. The first thing that comes to mind when I think about that is Billy Bob Thornton's character in Sling Blade, when in one continuous shot he tells the story of how he murdered 2 people. Mise-en-scène is what we all aspire in filmmaking, is to be able to tell a whole story in one shot so that we never have to cut. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. You require cutting because when you get to the editing room and you realize that your shot has gone on too long, or the pacing is wrong, or the audience has lost interest, you'll wish you had a close-up or a cutaway to cut to. I encourage you as filmmakers to always experiment with mise-en-scène, but always shoot a backup, shoot a close-up or a cutaway, maybe a medium shot or a reaction shot from another character, just to back yourself up. Don't forget, mise-en-scène is straight from the camera to the audience. True, you can color correct it, add sound effects and music, but that's about it. You can't edit for content. So if you want to get a medium shot without actually cutting, you're going to have to move the camera by using a dolly or a Steadicam or by using handheld means. And also you're going to have to do a lot of takes because nobody's going to get a 5-minute shot in one take. As you're going to watch in the movie production section, sometimes it takes as many as 10 takes to get a good wide shot. This wide shot or master shot can act as your mise-en-scène. You can try to use it as just one complete scene if you can, but you have to shoot the close-ups and the medium shots to make sure that if you cannot use it as one continuous shot, at least you have backups, you have something to cut to. There's always going to be something on the set that you're not going to see, you're not going to notice. Somebody flinches or the camera moves a little bit and you don't notice it when you're in the heat of the moment, but when you get to the studio or that post house and you're cutting your movie, you're going to notice it big time, and then you're going to wish you had a close-up to back yourself up with. Otherwise, the entire scene is scrapped. If you do have a mise-en-scène that you shot, but you didn't shoot a backup and you still want to be able to use the scene, you can intercut it with another scene and then take out the parts that you don't like. Well, thank you for watching the editing section. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. I hope also that you have a lot of research to do at this point because there's no way that any one section, 10 minutes or 10 hours, can encompass editing. It's such an involved and incredible theme. So I encourage you to do some more research into the people that we discussed here in this section. That way you can have a preconceived idea before you actually get on the field and start shooting of what you're going to end up editing later on in post. You know you're going to need cutaways, close-ups, reaction shots, and all those shots are going to help you make a movie that's greater than the sum of its individual parts.